Hi, this is Jeff Blauette, technical agronomist with Cooperative Farmers Elevator. And in this week's Field Friday segment, it might seem a little early, but I want to talk about what our stock quality could be looking like out in some of these cornfields. I get it, we're just starting to combine beans, and really getting rolling on that. But hopefully you got a little bit of rain here, so you've got a little bit of time where you can't combine. I'd like you to at least take a look at some of your cornfields, especially if you had some fields that were pretty stressed, where they never looked very good all year, some areas of field soil types that kind of struggled with some of the dry weather that we had and the heat. I'm concerned about this end of the season stock quality this year, probably more than normal. Earlier in the season, I talked about in an earlier episode how there's a lot of potassium deficiency that showed up with us being as dry as it was. It wasn't so much if the potassium was in the soil, but it was so dry that we couldn't take it up. And if you can't take up potassium very well, you can't take up nitrogen very well either in these fields. So that concerns me because potassium is what builds the plant. Our massive potassium uptake is when that plant really starts to elongate. It's trying to build that plant. So if it struggled with that earlier on, I'm concerned about what it did to our stock quality now. Those stresses can do a few other things. We've talked about crown rot in these stocks before. Remember, we had some pretty cool conditions when we were planting, and it wasn't very great for emergence in a lot of cases, especially April planted stuff. You can get crown rot, kind of starts to set in as that seedling plant starts to develop, but it doesn't really manifest itself usually until the end of the season here. So what you'll run into is as you go through these fields and do a push test, pushing these stalks over, you might notice that there's some that kink over. And a lot of times where they kink over is towards one of the nodes towards the bottom. If you take the leaf sheaths off like I have in this picture, you can see a healthy plant has some of these stalks that have some color to them, the reddish, the purple, or even just a nice dark green. But if they're reddish and purple, that plant's probably done. The corn's probably black layered. The sugar flow is kind of done up and down in that plant, as opposed to these plants that are next to it where when I push them over they do kink. When they kink, you can notice those plants don't have that nice color. They have more of that kind of that dull brown or yellow, and so what you're seeing is there's no healthy sugars in that plant, there's no strength left in those stalks, and they kink. So when I pull those plants up, in a lot of cases, I'll split one and show you these pictures here. This split stalk side by side is right from this field, two plants next to each other. You've got one that's got some crown rot. You can see at the very bottom of that stalk. I didn't dig it up, but I cut it as low as I could. You can see it's just rotted. That stalk is being cannibalized. Those nutrients that are in that white center of that stalk, the pith, is going into the ear, and it's taking away from stock quality. As compared to the plant next to it with a nice healthy plant, it's got a nice bright white, still full stock with that pith has not been sucked away yet, and you can see the crown has got a nice color to it yet. These are obviously side by side, so they're planted the same day, same hybrid, but the percentage of those plants that you have is what you got to be looking for. You can see what that did to this ear and the size of the kernels as we get these two side by side. So there's obviously a difference in yield and kernel depth. But even those smaller ears are much more valuable to have in the combine, obviously, than going to the ground. So I want to make sure that you guys are aware of what your field stock quality is, hybrid by hybrid, because that's going to be different as well. But I guess it's pretty important, especially with the soil type differences that we saw this year and the drought stress and the heat, that we evaluate what we've got out going on. I've got, you look in this field, obviously we're in a stress pocket here. Some of these spring back when I push them over, but some don't. Some, as I push them over, they kind of kink. They may want to try and stand back up, but some of them don't. You can kind of see that we've got some potential problems here with some of these that are going to fall over. We all know we've got a lot of these days in the fall when it's this dry, we're worried about combining because it gets so windy. We don't want the combine fire to take out the whole field. Well, if we get days like that, which we always seem to in the fall, that's the kind of wind that could be knocking these corn plants over here in a couple weeks. So I just want you to be aware of what's going on. Harvest is going to be earlier this year. Luckily, we've got harvest, from a dry down perspective, we're, here kind of later into the middle of September, we can still get maybe 3/4 of a point on average of dry down per day in these fields if that corn's black layered. But as we get into October, maybe that goes down to a 1/2 point. As we get past the middle of October, maybe a 1/4 point or less per day. So we don't have a lot of, faith in our warm end of October to dry down corn, so we just will take it out. Nothing good happens to these corn plants when that corn gets less than 25%, honestly. But for sure, we get less than 20. Bad things happen in cornfields. Nothing good happens. If you're curious, if you Google or search for Iowa corn dry down, there's a calculator that Iowa State's put together. I'll put the web address here, but it might be just as easy to Google it. But you can put in what your moisture is and what date it is, and you can click on a map where you are. If I look at Osceola County, I just punched in an Osceola County field just for instance. If that corn's just black layered, we usually say it's between 30 and 35%. So I just punch in 33% if I think that corn's just black layered here. And with an Osceola County date, it gives you kind of a warmer than normal and a cooler than normal range of where that moisture will be as we go down the calendar. So what it's showing me, if I do that on my example, we're going to have 20% corn by the 9th of October on average, with a range of maybe 18 to 21, 22 if we get, adverse weather. So that's kind of the range. It's a nice calculator to estimate when the corn's going to be at various moisture levels, and you can play with that when you want. But I think I just want to make you aware there's some things that could be going on. If your field's nice and green and healthy and the stalks all look good, fantastic. You don't have as much to worry about, but don't assume that this year. So just wanted to make you aware of what might be going on. So with that, that's this week's Field Friday segment, and we'll see you next week.